The document then goes on to outline a string of future business lines that read like science
Hope
fiction.
we go to Mars and all that stuff. To see that get turned into a way to transfer wealth.
If you are an index fund investor, you may soon be investing in these companies, whether you like it or not.
Okay, let's talk about the death of the index fund. And more importantly, let's talk about how billionaires are now trying to take one of the only decent investing tools ordinary people actually had. Because ordinary people do not get many doors into wealth. We do not get invited into private investment rounds. We do not get early access to the next giant tech company. We do not get to buy shares when the company is still cheap, quiet, private, and only available to insiders. We get the public version, the expensive version, the version that arrives after the billionaires, venture capitalists, bankers, and early investors have already eaten. And for years, the one simple thing ordinary people were told was this: do not try to beat the market, do not gamble, do not stock pick. Just buy index funds, put money into your pension, your 401k, your ISA, your retirement account, and let it grow slowly over time. That was the boring little escape route. Not perfect, not magic, but simple. And now, even that is being targeted, because when trillions of dollars automatically follow indexes, billionaires start looking at those indexes like a giant cash machine. The question becomes very simple. What happens when a billionaire can get his company into your index fund before the market has even had time to decide if the price makes sense? What happens when your retirement money becomes the exit door? That is what this SpaceX situation is really about. And yes, I know SpaceX is impressive. It launches rockets. It built Starlink. It changed part of the space industry. Nobody sensible is saying SpaceX is a fake company, but that is not the issue. A company can be real and still be overpriced. A company can be impressive and still be a bad investment. A rocket can reach space while the stock falls back to Earth. That is the part people forget, because when Elon Musk is involved, people stop asking normal questions. They stop asking, how much money does this company actually make? How much does it lose? Who controls it? Who is selling? Why is the valuation so high? They just hear rockets, Mars, Starlink, future, technology. And suddenly, everyone is supposed to clap like we are watching a superhero movie. But this is not a movie. This is people's retirement money. And SpaceX is reportedly aiming for a valuation around $1.75 trillion. Trillion. That is more than many countries. That is not a normal company valuation. That is a number so large it starts sounding like someone just leaned on the keyboard. And the scary part is not just the valuation. The scary part is how they are trying to get ordinary people's money into it. Because this is where NASDAQ comes in. NASDAQ is not just a stock exchange. It also has indexes like the NASDAQ 100. And index funds track those indexes. So if a company gets added to the NASDAQ 100, funds that follow that index have to buy it. They do not buy because it is cheap. They do not buy because it is safe. They do not buy because it is sensible. They buy because the rules say buy. That is the whole point of passive investing. The fund follows the list. And that is exactly why this is dangerous. Because if the rules of the list can be changed for billionaires, ordinary people are not investing freely anymore. They are being dragged into someone else's deal. Historically, new companies usually had to wait before getting into major indexes. That waiting period matters. It gives the market time to breathe. It gives people time to see what the company is actually worth. It gives the hype time to calm down. But now NASDAQ has introduced a fast entry rule that can allow huge new listings into the NASDAQ 100 after just 15 trading days. That is not a proper waiting period. That is a speed date with your pension. And who does that help? Does it help the nurse putting money into her pension? Does it help the warehouse worker trying to build a retirement pot? Does it help the teacher who just wants a boring index fund and a peaceful life? No. It helps the giant company. It helps the founder. It helps the early investors. It helps the banks. It helps the exchange win the listing. And it helps billionaires turn paper wealth into real money. Because that is what going public does. When a company is private, the rich people inside it may be rich on paper, but paper wealth is not the same as cash. To turn that paper wealth into actual money, they need buyers. And who are the buyers? The public, pension funds, index funds. People who were never allowed into the private deal suddenly become very useful when the insiders need a way out. That is why this feels so wrong, because ordinary people were not offered SpaceX when it was cheap. They were not invited early. They did not get the risky but potentially rewarding stage. They get invited when the valuation is already enormous. And now the system is being adjusted so index funds can become forced buyers. That is not democratizing investing. That is monetizing the exit. And this becomes even worse when you look at what SpaceX is becoming. Because this is not just a rocket company anymore. SpaceX has Starlink. That part makes sense. Starlink is real. It provides satellite internet. It has customers. It makes the SpaceX story stronger. But then you have XAI, formerly Twitter. You have this messy web of Musk companies being pushed together, sold to each other, merged into each other, and used to justify higher and higher valuations. And at some point, you have to ask, how can one billionaire move companies around like chess pieces? Connect loss-making businesses to profitable ones, wrap everything in a story about the future, and then ask ordinary investors to buy in at the highest price. The 2008 financial crisis was full of clever people doing things that were technically allowed, until the whole system exploded and ordinary people paid the price. And that is what worries me here. We keep watching the same pattern. The rich create complicated structures. The rich take huge risks. The rich extract the gains. Then when the risk blows up, ordinary people somehow end up paying. And now we are being told that SpaceX is not just about rockets. It is about artificial intelligence. It is about data centers. It is about computing power. It is about putting data centers in space. I need everyone to slow down and actually hear that, because sometimes billionaires say things so confidently that people forget to ask if it sounds ridiculous. A data center on Earth is already expensive, energy hungry, difficult to cool, difficult to run. Now they want people to believe the obvious future is to launch data centers into orbit, into one of the most hostile environments possible, where repairs are harder, costs are higher, radiation is a problem, launches can fail, and maintenance is not exactly a man in a van turning up with a toolbox. And somehow, this is meant to help justify $1 trillion valuation. Come on, at some point, visionary becomes another word for selling a fantasy with a spreadsheet attached. And the company's own filings have reportedly warned that space-based computing and interplanetary projects are early, technically complex, and may not become commercially viable. So even the paperwork is basically saying, yes, this sounds exciting, but it might not work. Yet ordinary people are still expected to treat this like the future of retirement investing. That is insane. And then there is XAI. XAI is burning huge amounts of money. One report said XAI lost $6.4 billion from operations in 2025 on $3.2 billion in revenue. That means it was not just losing money. It was losing money at a scale normal people cannot even process. If you lost money like that, the bank would block your card. If a billionaire loses money like that, they call it growth. And that is the difference. When ordinary people are broke, it is personal responsibility. When billionaires burn billions, it is innovation. Look at Tesla. Tesla was supposed to be a car company. Then suddenly, it was not just a car company. It was a software company, then a robot company, then an AI company, then a robotaxi company, then a humanoid robot company. Every time the story needs more hype, the company becomes something else. And yes, Tesla made electric cars mainstream. That is real. But the constant rebranding is the problem. When the numbers need a bigger story, the story gets bigger. Cars are not enough. Now it is robots. Rockets are not enough. Now it is data centers in space. Satellite internet is not enough. Now it is artificial intelligence, Mars, consciousness, and whatever else can push the valuation higher. At some point, this stops looking like vision and starts looking like a grift. And the end goal is obvious. Elon Musk wants to become the world's first trillionaire. That is what this is about. Not humanity, not ordinary people, not your pension, not your future. A trillionaire. And I have one question. How much is enough? Seriously. Now we're talking about one man becoming a trillionaire while ordinary people are being told they may never retire. How is that not broken? How can someone chase $1 trillion while the people whose pension funds may be forced to buy his stock are struggling with rent, bills, debt, and retirement insecurity? At what point do we stop calling it ambition and start calling it hoarding? Because extreme wealth is not just success, it is power. And now that power is coming for index funds. That is why the free float matters. Let me explain that simply. Free float means the amount of a company's shares that are actually available for the public to buy. Imagine SpaceX is a giant cake, but instead of selling the whole cake to the public, they only sell a tiny slice. That tiny slice is the float. Now imagine millions of investors, funds, traders, and index funds all trying to buy that tiny slice. What happens? The price can shoot up, not because the cake is worth more, but because there is not enough cake available. That is scarcity, and scarcity can create hype. So if SpaceX sells only a small percentage of shares to the public, but then gets pushed quickly into major indexes, you have a dangerous setup. Small supply, massive demand, index funds forced to buy, price pushed up, early investors get a chance to sell, ordinary people get the risk. That is the bag holder problem. And this is not just a theory. IPO history is ugly. A famous paper called the New Issues Puzzle found that companies issuing new stock often perform badly compared with similar companies already listed. IPOs are often great for insiders, often great for bankers, often great for hype, but not always great for ordinary people buying after the party has already started. And now they want to connect that IPO machine to index funds. That is the nightmare, because index funds do not think, they follow. If the stock gets added, they buy. If the price is ridiculous, they buy. If the founder has total control, they buy. If the company is losing billions, they buy. If the business model depends on space data centers and promises about the future, they buy. Not because it is wise, because the rules say so. And now the rules are changing. That is the part people need to be angry about. NASDAQ bending the rules for mega IPOs opens the door. And once that door is open, what happens next? What happens when OpenAI goes public? What happens when Anthropic goes public? What happens when the next giant private company comes along and says, we also want fast entry? Do the rules bend again? Do index funds become automatic buyers again? Do ordinary people get dragged into another $1 trillion hype machine again? Because that is how systems change. First, it happens once. Then everyone says it is unusual. Then it happens again. Then everyone says the market has evolved. Then it becomes normal. Then when ordinary people complain, they are told they should have read the fine print. That is how they get you. And this is why I worry this could help create the next market crash. Not tomorrow. Not because one company goes public, but because the pattern is dangerous. Huge private companies staying private for longer. Valuations rising in private markets. Insiders marking their own homework. Public markets being used as the exit. Index funds being forced to buy. Retail investors getting hyped up. Ordinary pensions being exposed. Then, when the bubble bursts, who suffers? Not the billionaire who cashed out. Not the bankers who got their fees. Not the early investors who sold. Ordinary people. Again, retirement accounts fall. Pensions take the hit. Workers delay retirement. People are told markets go up and down. People are told not to panic. And the people who created the mess move on to the next deal. That is the cycle. They inflate. They extract. It crashes. We suffer. They restart. And every time we are told it is just the market. No. And the people with power are changing the system to benefit themselves. That is why this feels bigger than SpaceX. Because it is the same story everywhere. Housing was supposed to be shelter. They turned it into an asset class. Education was supposed to create opportunity. They turned it into debt. Healthcare was supposed to keep people alive. They turned it into a billing system. Pensions were supposed to let people retire with dignity. They turned them into individual risk accounts. Now index funds, one of the last boring tools ordinary people had, are being turned into a billionaire exit ramp. What is next? Are they going to charge us for the air we breathe? And the sad part is, if they could find a way to meter it, securitize it, package it into an ETF, and sell it back to us with a management fee, they probably would, because nothing is sacred. Not homes, not healthcare, not retirement, not even the boring index fund. Everything ordinary people rely on eventually becomes a product for the rich to extract from. That is the pattern, and the SpaceX IPO shows exactly how it works. Create a giant story, attach it to the future, push the valuation higher, mix profitable parts with loss-making dreams, keep control, limit the public float, get index rules changed, force passive money to buy, let early investors cash out, then tell ordinary people they are lucky to have access. That is not democracy, that is extraction. And I'm tired of hearing billionaires talk about saving humanity while ordinary people cannot afford rent. I am tired of hearing about Mars when people on Earth cannot retire. I am tired of hearing about innovation when the innovation is just finding new ways to move risk from the rich to everyone else. Because that is what this is. Risk moves downward, wealth moves upward, every time, and they still have the nerve to call it progress. So what should ordinary people do? First, do not panic. This is not me saying index funds are dead and you should sell everything. Index funds are still useful. Low fees still matter. Diversification still matters. Long-term investing still matters. The point is not to run away. The point is to wake up. Second, know what your fund tracks. If you own a NASDAQ 100 fund, understand it is not just a neutral basket. It has rules, and those rules can change. If you own a total market fund, understand it may buy IPOs faster than you think. If you own an S&P 500 fund, understand that index providers have power over what gets included and when. You do not need to become a finance expert, but you do need to stop thinking passive means nobody is making decisions. Someone is always making decisions. The only question is whether those decisions protect you or protect billionaires. Third, be suspicious when billionaires say ordinary people are finally getting access. Ask why now? Why not earlier? Why only after the valuation is massive? Why after the insiders already own the upside? Why after the story has been hiked to the moon? Because sometimes access is not opportunity. Sometimes access is the moment the rich are ready to sell. And finally, ask the simplest question in the world. Who benefits? If NASDAQ changes the rules, who benefits? If SpaceX gets fast entry into indexes, who benefits? If the public float is tiny and index demand is huge, who benefits? If early investors can sell and ordinary people's pensions have to buy, who benefits? If Elon keeps control but public investors take the risk, who benefits? It is not complicated. They just make it complicated so you stop asking. Because the real story is simple. Billionaires already took the housing market. They took the political system. They took media. They took data. They took attention. They took public money through subsidies and bailouts. And now they want the boring pension money too. The slow money, the quiet money, the money ordinary people put away every month hoping that one day they can stop working. That is what they are coming for. And that is why this matters. Because the index fund was supposed to be one of the few things that worked for normal people. But if billionaires can bend the rules, hype the valuation, limit the float, fast track into indexes, and use passive funds as forced buyers, then even the boring safe option becomes part of the machine. That is the death of the index fund. Not that it disappears, but that it loses its innocence. It becomes another pipe connected to the billionaire wealth machine, and ordinary people become the water flowing through it. So the next time someone tells you SpaceX is the future, ask them one thing. Future for who? Future for humanity? Or future for the billionaire trying to become a trillionaire? Because if the future means ordinary people's pensions being used to cash out insiders at the top, then that is not the future. That is the same old scam with rockets attached. And if this box stays open, SpaceX will not be the last. OpenAI could be next. Anthropic could be next. The next giant private company could be next. And every time, the same argument will come back. The company is too important to wait. The index must represent the future. The rules need to evolve. Ordinary investors deserve access. No. Ordinary investors deserve protection. They deserve fair rules. They deserve not to be used as forced buyers for billionaire exits. They deserve a financial system that does not turn every simple tool into another way to extract from them. Because enough is enough. If the man already has hundreds of billions and still needs your pension to become a trillionaire, maybe the problem is not ambition. Maybe the problem is greed. And maybe the rocket is not taking us to Mars. Maybe it is taking ordinary people's retirement money straight to the top.